Hey everybody, what's up? Govey Wovey here, just checking in. 7 a.m., Salt Lake FBI office. Uh, the reason why I'm here is because if the local FBI is ignoring extortion, collusion, and corruption in local courthouses, then that only means one thing about the local FBI. So it's important that the staff and agents know that their bosses here may not have their best interests in mind, because when those bosses eventually get caught, as always happens when the money rolls to the other side of the table, those bosses will throw these agents and staff right under the bus and blame all them. And they'll try to provoke them and do what they do to make the agents get angry or upset and do something stupid. And then they'll blame it all on the agents or staff, and then they'll use that to try to make themselves look innocent. That pattern of a villain antagonizing and antagonizing a target and then doing worse and worse things to try and cover it up to provoke the person is an old pattern. And believe it or not, parts of it were developed at imposter parts of Harvard back in the 1950s in studies they did there through Dr. Henry A. Murray, who was out of Columbia University. And that study, they targeted minors, people who were under 18 specifically at Harvard. And believe it or not, one of those students who they used these tactics on to see what would happen was named Ted Kaczynski, who ended up becoming the Unabomber after that invisible act of war was engaged upon him as a minor. And then they just cut him loose on the world without helping him navigate all that. So, another example of these kind of tactics are the Stanford prison experiment. You can look up that. But it is a common dark practice taught in certain circles. There's two judges in the Matheson Courthouse in Salt Lake City who use a similar script, or the script from that Henry A. Murray study. It's not a study, but abusive experiment, let's call it. That's been confirmed through other victims who've reached out to me as I've shared word about all this, and it's what it is, and that's one way how these corrupt courthouses get what they get out of people and extort them and crush them. Is they antagonize, and then eventually they believe it will take care of itself as the person either gets their heart broken and dies from stress of the courts unjustly stealing their children or doing horrible things in that situation, or they go home and get drunk or do drugs and fall off into alcoholism or drug addiction, or they go home and get drunk and whatever, or they go do something stupid and get thrown in prison. And that's why these people will do worse and worse things. They will continue to do that. They'll do something to cover up a little bit of their extortion, and then if the person survives, then they'll do worse and worse and worse things, and they'll make it go on and on and on, months and months and months and years, waiting for that horror and that tragedy to happen. And then it just gets looks worse and worse and worse as it happens. In my case, which started a lot of this, was about 5-6 years ago. An attorney out of Provo, two attorneys named Virginia Sudbury and Allison Satterley, used a scheme that is still hidden on the Utah courthouse's website today, to target me, to Judge Faust, and say all sorts of horrible things to me without me knowing. And for those who are interested, I can show you where that's hidden, right in plain sight, because Most well-intending people would never believe that anyone would twist this loophole the way that these less than honest people do. These people who are posing as members of Utah State Bar, as commissioners, attorneys, and judges. And so they used that loophole on me, and Judge Faust forced him to go off the rails and do all sorts of things. And that's where I noticed some of the lines he used were off that Henry A. Murray script. And it seemed very quickly that he was just trying to provoke me. And so I just endured. And that's gone on for 6 years as horrible, horrible things have happened. But that also is what got me to start sharing this story about this loophole and the corruption and extortion and the collusion, and discovering that Utah State Bar isn't really an office of the state of Utah, and that's why it doesn't supervise attorneys, and that's why they can do these 20 schemes. Actually, there's more than 20 schemes I've identified now that they use. The one of the worst horrors is that there are imposter attorneys who are intentionally overdosing their own clients with an imitation of the law designed to be so painful that they hope their own clients commit suicide so that they can add tens of thousands of dollars to the dead client's bill and take it without anyone knowing. And they use the courts to do that either through one scheme or another, or even just putting a lien on the person's home. And that's how they'll even make it worse and worse on the person, is say, hey, you owe me $40,000, and when the person questions it, the imposter will withdraw as their attorney and then say, well, now I'm putting a lien on your home, and by the way, I'm going to add a couple $1,000s a month to it. And they do. So another horror is that about a year and a half ago, an attorney named Nate Wall out of Cottonwood Heights committed a forgery where he signed my name on papers he drafted without letting me read. And what that was an artificial, or it was a relocation stipulation that allowed my 14-year-old daughter's mom and stepdad to relocate her to North Carolina. And they basically bribed or paid Nate Wall to do that. And he did it, and then they gave it to my daughter and told her that I signed it without, and that I basically signed it giving her away to them and that they could do whatever they want. Then a couple hours later, they put her on a plane and relocated her to North Carolina. And obviously, she's been upset ever since and has had other overwhelming challenges come her way that she is doing her best to navigate. And as we continue to do this, but the horror is that in that, Commissioner Manasse protected Nate Wall in that forgery. So did Judge Pettit. But Commissioner Manasse even ordered a gag order preventing me from talking about it or even telling my daughter what really happened, so that he could throw me in jail or provoke me or whatever if I told her about it. And then what's worse is 6 months ago, in the case of my other daughter, Commissioner Manasse interpreted all sorts of things of his own to basically limit my parenthood of my other daughter, who's 7. And both my daughters, I've been a co-parent to more than half the time. They've lived with me more than half the time until this stuff involving Commissioner Manasse started happening. And I know all it is that because he covered the forgery for Nate Wall, he's just trying to do worse and worse things, believing that eventually it'll provoke me to do something stupid, and then they can blame everything on me and they'll all look innocent. The horrors that Commissioner Manasse has allowed in his courtroom along the way are unbelievable. He's allowed a guardian ad litem to attack me personally, verbally, and say things beyond unconscionable for a guardian ad litem to say. He has allowed a private guardian ad litem to completely be off the radar for 3 months and completely ignoring how in desperate need of a real guardian ad litem the situation is. And he's allowed it all, just trying to continue that tactic of antagonizing and provoking. And And what people don't realize is it's part of that collusion, that extortion, that corruption that the Utah State Bar ignores. And as far as other people go, and then there was a couple years ago where a collection agency targeted me with a bogus collection fee, and I spent thousands of dollars fighting that, but there were two judges in the courthouse who seemed to collude with the collection agency, not just against me, but against hundreds of people a week, where they would line us all up at the courthouse at the same time. And that's when I realized that the reason why they did that is so that this collection agency could bill 80, 40, 50, 60, 100 people, 80 people for the same hour or 3 hours while they were waiting, which, if you do the math, basically adds up to that collection agency being able to send out a bunch of bogus letters. The judges rubber stamp everything and do summary decisions, and then line everyone up so that the collection agency can bill $60,000 in one morning just for having 100 people show up to question what's going on. And the administrative office of the court colludes in that by scheduling everyone's hearing at the same time. So you've got that office, you've got the guardian ad litem office. In addition to that, you have Division of Child and Family Services, the Utah State Bar that isn't what it is, and on and on and on. That's all just part of this extortion. Why there are so many hundreds, if not thousands, of attorneys committing extortion are because they are intentionally withholding information from their clients who are paying them for information. So that's extortion, that's a federal crime, and that's why I'm here at the Federal Bureau of Investigation waiting for someone to see if there's any heroes in that building, or if not, but I think it's going to take someone from out of state to really get involved with this. So there's a whole bunch more to talk about. Other victims who've reached out to me, these schemes that are being used against them and others, and it's all been exposed. And why is because what may have just started as a way to get things done was hijacked by these imposters. They've created these 20 schemes, and they're all doing their own little corruption or their own little thing, either because they're old-fashioned or they're cheap shills, cheap pawns, or they're ringleaders in it. Whether it's, and that applies to Commissioner Manasse, Commissioner Bloomquist, Judge Faust, Judge Pettit, Judge Lawrence, and on and on and on. Chief Justice Matthew Durand is looking the other way. Even Dallin Harris Oaks, of the first presidency, and you know what group I'm talking about, was a member of the Supreme Court when these schemes were going on. And so explain that to me. And then you've got Faust with James E. Faust, who was among the leadership of that same organization. And the reason why I say organization is because there are beautiful parts of LDS culture, but those beautiful parts of LDS culture continue to abandon the deceptive parts of Mormonism, as we are seeing with James Huntsman and lines and lines and lines of other people who are really discovering what is out there, that just like these courthouses in Utah, there are other parts of this organization that have been hijacked by imposters and are not what they say they are. So you can learn more about all this at a few different places that they're all works in progresses. Works, WERXUSA.com. You can go to impeachsimgill.com, because whether he knows it or not, his office covered up that forgery that Nate Wall committed. So did Detective Story, Lieutenant Ackerman, Unified PD, Chief Justin Hoyle, Chief Wayne Dial at Unified PD, and then you have everyone else along the way with that who've covered up this forgery as part of their little cabal or whatever they're doing, whether they realize how serious it is or not. So you can check out impeachsimgill.com for more of this. And all these videos will get better, I promise you. Heroes or zeros, that's a sign I'm rocking today. And anyway, So we're just going to keep this going. Judge Faust, Chief Justice Matthew Durant, I have personally delivered many, many letters to your offices trying to get you to find out about this. The silence is usually only indicative of one thing. But I did that because of your actions. I believe there is a chance that you could just be too old-fashioned or too overwhelmed to really know what's going on. But as far as Commissioner Manasse goes and others, the actions, it's just impossible to ignore the schemes, the collusion, the extortion, the cover-ups, what's been allowed to happen in those courtrooms, all part of those abusive tactics and techniques that are very primitive, and they probably worked for decades, but it's a new humanity. There's a new human being out there, and these primitive tactics don't work anymore. And I'm not the only one. There are many, many people who are realizing this, and they're not falling for it, and that's why it's simply time for all of it to end. So anyone who wants to chat, Chief Justice Matthew Durant, Judge Faust, you've got an explanation for this, you want to talk about it, you really want to see what's going on, how you were manipulated by people like Virginia Sudbury and Allison Satterley, Joe Nemelka, Aaron Garrett, Nate Wall, Richard Plen, Patricia LaTulippe, Kara Barton, on and on and on. There's 20, 30 names just from a few examples that we could name, and more are rolling in every day. So this is, regardless of what your situation is in this, whether you're too old-fashioned, confused, a cheap pawn who thought you were just doing what needed to happen, or a ringleader of all this, it is as dark as you think it is. These horrors are real. There are attorneys who are intentionally overdosing their own clients with imitations of the law, hoping they commit suicide so they can rob fortunes from them. I can prove that with case numbers, and that the appellate court, even Judge Ryan Harris was involved in a case where a person, Stephen S. Christensen, an imposter, is doing this in Utah and was caught, but the appellate court looked the other way, Utah State Bar looked the other way, and it just keeps going. As far as I know, Stephen S. Christensen did have his legal license revoked in California, but not in Utah, which a lot of you don't know is known in D.C. and other areas as the most corrupt state in the nation. And all this contributes to why Utah has the highest rates of suicide in the nation, as well as child abuse, fraud, and other horrors. So it is a ticking time bomb in every household in the country, and especially in Utah. These imposters especially target cases involving collection, eviction, divorce, custody, immigration. There's immigrants who've paid thousands of dollars over and over again to attorneys who just take their money and drop them, which is one of the schemes they do in divorce and custody cases as well. Elderly issues, and as a licensed real estate broker in the state of Utah, I can tell you they also target real estate litigation. Anything involving land, especially land in a will, is horrific. You will watch people give $100,000 to colluding attorneys thinking they're trying to solve something when really it's just there for the attorneys to extort and take from them. So, FBI, now you know there are hundreds, if not thousands, of extortion cases ready to be prosecuted here in Salt Lake City, Utah, and you continue to ignore it, which only means one thing about the local office of the FBI. And the horror is that this stuff goes beyond Utah in ways, and it all seems to add up to more than $48 billion a year that imposters in other areas are able to collect, whether it's disguised as taxes or other things. But this needs to stop. It ends now. It is what is creating all the horrors in every neighborhood and community in Utah, every home, and they are exploiting it, and these imposters are making fortunes off it. And then the horror is that then they expect the police officers and other 911 responders to go clean up their mess while they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars off it. So that's that. We'll add another domain name or two and get this going. I guess it's about 7:20, and this is usually about when the FBI seems to, well, the staff or whatever seems to start rolling in. But I also noticed for some reason on Fridays there aren't as many cars that show up. There's about a fifth as amount of cars. So maybe that means the FBI doesn't work on Friday, but that would make sense, and that would explain a lot too. So thanks for watching this. UtahDAP.com is another resource, and we'll just keep this rolling. Also, TikTok at GuvvyWuvvy, GUVVYWUVVY. Thanks a bunch, and have a great day.